Imagine waking up in a world with no doctors, no biology books, no microscopes, no schools teaching you where babies come from. You watch a woman become pregnant. Months later, a baby is born. But there is one enormous mystery. What caused it? Today, we learn about reproduction so early in life that it seems obvious. But for our distant ancestors, the connection between sex and childbirth may have been one of nature's greatest mysteries. So how did ancient humans figure out mating? And more importantly, how did they realize that mating could lead to a baby? The answer probably wasn't one dramatic discovery. There was no single ancient human who suddenly shouted, "That's how babies are made." Instead, the knowledge was probably built slowly, through observation, experience, and thousands of generations of human life. And the deeper we look into this question, the stranger it becomes. Because humans didn't need to understand sperm. They didn't know about eggs. They had no idea what DNA was. They couldn't see fertilization happening inside the body. Yet eventually, human societies clearly developed ideas about sex, pregnancy, fertility, childbirth, and family. So where did that knowledge begin? Let's go back. Before cities. Before farming. Before writing. Before recorded history. Imagine a small group of hunter-gatherers moving through a landscape. Their world is completely different from ours. There are no hospitals, no birth certificates, no scientific explanations. But there is something they do have. Observation. They can watch animals. They can watch pregnancies. They can watch births. And they can watch their own community. And this matters because nature constantly provides clues. A female animal mates with a male. Later, she becomes pregnant. Eventually, she gives birth. Humans could observe this pattern repeatedly. But observing animals alone wouldn't solve the mystery. After all, humans aren't animals in exactly the same way. So the most important clues were probably happening inside their own communities. Imagine a woman in a prehistoric group. She is young. She has no child. Later, she has sexual contact with a man. Time passes. Her body begins to change. Her belly grows. Eventually, a baby is born. Now imagine this happening again, and again, and again. People don't need modern biology to notice a pattern. They simply need memory. Something happened before. Then something happened later. And after enough generations, those observations could become cultural knowledge. But there is a problem. Pregnancy doesn't happen immediately. That makes the connection surprisingly difficult to understand. If someone eats food, the result is obvious. If someone gets injured, the cause can be obvious. But conception is different. A sexual encounter happens, and nothing visible happens. Days pass. Weeks pass. Maybe months later, pregnancy becomes noticeable. The original event may already be a distant memory. So how did humans connect the two? Probably through repeated experience. Imagine an entire community watching births over generations. Adults would notice who became pregnant. They would remember relationships. They would observe patterns. And younger people would learn from older people. This is where human culture becomes extremely important. Humans don't just learn individually. We learn from each other. A mother can teach a daughter. An older hunter can teach a younger hunter. A community can preserve knowledge through stories and traditions. And reproductive knowledge could have been transmitted in exactly this way. But there's another fascinating clue. Animals themselves display mating behavior. Humans didn't need to invent the concept of mating from nothing. They could observe animals engaging in sexual behavior. They could see changes during mating seasons. They could observe pregnant females. They could watch animals give birth. And humans were themselves part of the same biological world. So perhaps early humans didn't suddenly discover mating. They simply learned more and more about something they were already participating in. But understanding that sex can produce children is only one part of the story. There was another mystery. Who is the father? Pregnancy develops inside the woman's body. The baby grows there. So the connection between a particular man and a particular child is not physically obvious. This could have made human reproduction culturally fascinating. And once humans began living in larger and more organized communities, questions about relationships, partners, inheritance, family, and parenthood became increasingly important. Eventually, societies developed rules surrounding sexual relationships. Some relationships were accepted, others were forbidden. Some societies created marriage systems. Others organized families in different ways. But these social systems came much later than the basic biological behavior itself. Humans were reproducing long before formal marriage existed. That's an important distinction. Mating is biological. Marriage is cultural. One is part of reproduction. The other is a social system humans created to organize relationships and families. And this distinction gives us a glimpse into how ancient human knowledge may have developed. First came experience, then observation, then memory, then explanation, and eventually, culture. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Ancient humans could understand that sex was connected to pregnancy, while completely misunderstanding why. Think about that. You don't need to know how a storm forms to know that dark clouds often come before rain. You don't need to understand gravity to know that dropping a stone makes it fall. And you don't need to understand fertilization to notice that mating is associated with pregnancy. This is how much of human knowledge probably began. Observation came first, explanation came later. Our ancestors may have created many different explanations for pregnancy. Some cultures later believed that supernatural forces, spirits, gods, ancestors, or mysterious substances played roles in conception. These beliefs could be completely different from modern biology. But that doesn't mean people hadn't noticed the underlying pattern. In fact, the very existence of fertility rituals and beliefs across ancient societies shows how important reproduction became to human culture. Once humans began farming, the connection became even more powerful. Farmers watched seeds become plants. They watched animals reproduce. They watched humans give birth. The idea of fertility became connected to survival itself. A successful birth meant another member of the community, another worker, another hunter, another future parent. Human reproduction wasn't just personal. It affected the survival of the entire group. But when did humans actually understand the biological mechanism? That is much harder to answer. We have no prehistoric textbook saying, here is how conception works. We don't have a Stone Age scientist explaining sperm and eggs. And we certainly don't have a recording of the first person who figured it all out. The archaeological record simply doesn't preserve thoughts very well. Bones survive, stone tools survive, some pigments survive. Occasionally, ancient artwork survives. But an idea inside someone's mind? That is much harder to recover. This means we need to be careful. We can reasonably infer that prehistoric humans observed mating, pregnancy, and birth. We can infer that knowledge about reproduction could have been passed between generations. But we cannot confidently describe exactly what every ancient human believed. There was probably no single universal prehistoric explanation. Different groups likely had different ideas. Some may have had surprisingly accurate practical knowledge. Others may have connected pregnancy to supernatural causes. And many may have simply accepted reproduction as one of the mysterious facts of life. Eventually, however, human societies began recording their ideas. And that's when the story becomes easier to follow. In the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, China, India, and elsewhere, people developed increasingly elaborate ideas about reproduction, fertility, pregnancy, and childbirth. But even then, understanding was incomplete. They could observe pregnancy, they could assist births, they could recognize fertile periods, they could develop theories about conception. Yet the microscopic world remained invisible. The discovery of sperm and the eventual development of modern reproductive biology came much later. Only with advances in microscopy and experimental science could humans begin seeing the processes taking place at a microscopic level. Eventually, we discovered something our ancestors could never have seen. A tiny sperm cell, an egg, fertilization, an embryo beginning its development, and then DNA. Suddenly, the ancient mystery became a biological process that could be studied in extraordinary detail. But perhaps the most remarkable thing is this: our ancestors didn't need any of that to begin understanding reproduction. They had something much simpler. They had eyes, they had memory, they had curiosity, and they had generations. One generation observed, the next remembered, the next added something, and slowly, over enormous stretches of time, human knowledge grew. So perhaps the first humans didn't discover sex in one moment. They didn't suddenly figure out where babies came from. The truth was probably much more gradual. They watched animals. They experienced relationships. They witnessed pregnancies. They attended births. They remembered what happened before. They compared experiences. They taught younger generations. And eventually, humans began turning observations into explanations. From that simple beginning came some of humanity's oldest questions. Why do women become pregnant? How does a baby begin? Why do some pregnancies happen and others don't? Why does a child resemble its parents? And perhaps the biggest question of all, how can two people create an entirely new human being? Today, we can answer that question at a level our ancestors could never have imagined. We can see cells, we can study chromosomes, we can observe embryos, we can analyze DNA. But the basic mystery, the mystery that must have existed for our earliest ancestors, was already there. Two people, one encounter, and months later, a new life. No microscope could reveal it. No textbook could explain it. Nature simply kept repeating the same extraordinary process until humans slowly began to notice the pattern. And maybe that's the real story. The first great discoveries weren't made in laboratories. They were made by watching the world, watching animals, watching the seasons, watching birth, watching death, watching each other, and asking the most powerful question humans have ever asked. Why? Because long before humans understood reproduction, they had already begun doing something that would eventually change the world. They were observing, they were remembering, and they were learning.